From abstract marks to literal representations of things brands are named after, there are many different types of symbol logos. Some are simple, some are complex, some are full of colour, some are black. Some live within placeholders, some roam free, and a lot are the first letter of a brand. Yet lately, it seems more and more brands are striving to be summed up in a mark, without the need for, well, words. From car companies to clothing brands, the need to be instantly identifiable across physical and digital experiences seems to be pushing a lot of companies to fit their entire brand essence into a rounded square. So which brands have actually done it? Let's find out. These are 10 brands whose logos are just symbols now. Number 10. Adidas. In 2021, Adidas released a new logo that looked very similar to the one it had used for decades. Since 1991, the athletic wear brand has used its famous three-stripe symbol with a word mark beneath it. Ahead of the 2022 Qatar Football World Cup, the German company tweaked its logo, removing the word mark it had featured in some form or another since 1950. The symbol-only logo began popping up on social media leading up to the 2022 World Cup, then gradually rolled out on its website, physical stores, and clothes. While the old logo with the word mark will continue to appear on retro items and re-releases, the company is relying on the three stripes to represent the brand solo going forward. Number 9. Nike. After changing its name from Blue Ribbon Sports, Nike introduced a new logo in 1971, the Nike swoosh. Although he only paid graphic design student Caroline Davidson $35 for it, Nike founder Phil Knight didn't love the swoosh at first. And because the brand was still new, the logo had to be accompanied by a word mark at launch. By 1978, the swoosh had not only grown on Knight, it had become closely identified with the Nike brand and became a more prominent part of the logo. It was converted from a stroke to being filled in black and having the new Nike word mark in all caps Futura work around it. In 1985, the main brand colour changed from black and white to red and white. Then 10 years later, the word mark was removed altogether. By this time, the swoosh had become truly iconic and could stand on its own to represent the company as it does to this day. While the Futura word mark and even the cursive lowercase serif version appear on packaging and shoes here or there, it's usually for particular lines and retro re-releases. But on store signage, apps, and official corporate comms, the swoosh is the logo. No word mark needed. Number 8. Mastercard. In 2019, Mastercard updated its logo. The famous intersecting red and yellow circles were there, but the word mark was not. After a redesign in 2016, led by design agency Pentagram, the brand did 2 years' worth of audience research. They found that 80% of people spontaneously recognized the intersecting circles logo. This insight made Mastercard comfortable enough with removing the word mark and relying solely on its iconic symbol. The intersecting circles logo had been around since 1966, when Mastercard was still called MasterCharge. Since then, it was updated with the new name, got a 90s font and aesthetic update where the intersection element was converted into halftone style. Then in 2016, it was simplified to look like two filled circles overlapping, with an updated, quieter, all lowercase word mark. Pentagram partner Michael Beirout, who worked on the project, said the new 2019 logo sees Mastercard enter an elite cadre of brands that are represented not by name, but by symbol, an apple, a target, a swoosh. While that may be the ambition, the logos for Apple and Target work as symbols because the brand names and the logos are one and the same. They're the names of things. But it does make sense to compare it to the Nike swoosh, which on its own is an abstract image, but has been imbued with meaning as the market has been educated on the brand and products it represents. The real reason Mastercard is stripping its brand down to its bare essentials is because we're moving to a cardless future. More and more, brands like Mastercard and Visa are simply small icons we see in the virtual checkout. Seeing the intersecting red and yellow circles, or the blue and yellow stripes, signals that our payments will be secure. This is why Visa's branding is moving in a similar direction to Mastercard's, whittling its logo down to just its stripes at checkout. We'll have to wait for Mastercard's next round of audience research to find out if it worked. Number 7. McDonald's. McDonald's brand is so ubiquitous that you'd be forgiven for not realizing how much it's changed over the years. Since debuting in 1961, the golden arches have taken a few different forms and undergone many design treatments. Inspired by some of the company's early restaurants, which used 2 golden arches and diagonal roofs to attract customers, the shapes were soon styled into an M to represent the company's name. But through the 70s and into the 1990s, the golden arches were often accompanied by the McDonald's wordmark cutting through it, usually housed in a warm red tile. In the 90s and the early 2000s, the golden arches made appearances unbundled from the wordmark, with shadows or 3D rendering applied to them. But generally, they were still locked behind the wordmark for official use. In 2019, Turner Duckworth were brought in to declutter the brand and make it what CEO Steve Easterbrook called a modern, progressive burger company. In this new identity, the arches have been liberated, standing on their own and officially turning McDonald's into an icon brand. The arches can now be used more freely, with cropping and altering perspective allowed. The icon has also influenced the colour palette. Previously, red was the dominant colour, with a highlight of yellow, but now it's very much the other way round. The arches have also inspired the company's custom font, Speedy, which incorporates the symbol's shapes and curves into its letters. While they feature sparingly, the use of the arches is more playful. They don't have to appear everywhere, yet when they do, there's a power and also a lightness to them. Look at the end of this animation and notice the single stroke of one of the arches on the drink. You don't even need to see the whole thing to know what it is. Or this animation, where the arches morph to form the shape beneath the bridge. There's a subtle delight to that. It makes sense for a global brand that's mainly selling consistency of product and experience. They have one of the most identifiable logos in the world. They don't need a wordmark that may have to be reworked in other markets. The big golden arches say enough, which is why, increasingly, it's the main thing you'll see outside their restaurants. Number 6. Starbucks. From 1971 to 2011, coffee brand Starbucks used a logo with a similar structure. An illustration of a siren, shown within a circle with the words Starbucks and coffee bordering it. While the siren had been altered and gradually cropped in more and more, the general logo structure had remained more or less the same, until 2011, when the words Starbucks and coffee were removed. The change marked the brand's 40th anniversary, and the simplified design took the elements that most people interpreted from the previous logo, the siren and the green, and refined the logo down to only those elements. It solved a major problem. Starbucks, which wanted to sell more than just coffee, didn't want to confuse consumers. Starbucks actually sells tea, food, and other products at its stores and in supermarkets, among other places. Yet when people saw the words Starbucks Coffee on the previous logo, which technically was the company's name, they assumed the product had caffeine or indeed coffee in it. For such a complex symbol, it speaks to Starbucks' savvy, and frankly the company's aggressiveness at opening stores in the early 2000s, that the logo is so well known. But when you consider that most people, after a while, interpret the colour and shape of a logo more than its content, you can see how they've succeeded here. In fact, a great test for iconic brands is in simple illustrations and animations like these, where details like eyes and noses aren't present, just the bare essentials. What are the bare essentials of a logo? It seems that Starbucks can successfully indicate its logo by placing a green circle on a takeaway coffee cup. That's how powerful their consistent use of a similar shade of green and a circle in their logo has been. Starbucks, like McDonald's, is a ubiquitous brand that spent years educating the market on its logo, vibe, and product. Being a global brand that transcends the barriers of language and indeed categories like coffee is vital to its growth. And its ability to be identified just through its symbol is testament to the brand equity it's built. Number 5. Volkswagen. In 2020, Volkswagen introduced a new version of its iconic VW logo. Thinner and more minimal, it signaled the brand's electrification and should apparently be more legible across different screens. What the new logo also signaled was the end of having its name accompany it. An iconic symbol, Volkswagen had for a long time alternated using it alone or with a wordmark in different applications. Around in some variation since the late 1930s, the VW logo is truly iconic, and whenever I see it, it reminds me of VW's history of quirky ads, of which its font was a big part. But that soft, playful image came to a head when in 2015 the US EPA found that the company had used software in its diesel engines to cheat emissions tests. That same year, it just happened to launch a new font. It previously used a modified version of Futura, but it was replaced by a slightly more clinical font that Volkswagen owned. While it has been used here or there to accompany the logo, in most cases, it's much less prominent, leaving it to the new VW logo to rep the brand alone. Number 4. Formula One. In 2017, after 23 years of using the old one, Formula One unveiled a new logo. The previous logo, introduced in 1994, was designed by Carter and Wong, and existed in a time when F1 was more about specs, stats, and speed. But by 2017, the sport's connection with its fan base was missing some passion. That year, it was acquired by Liberty Media, who went to work trying to broaden the brand's global appeal. Designed by Richard Turley, who was a year into his role as Executive Creative Director of Content and Design at Whedon & Kennedy, the new identity was built to be more fan-focused and to make that goal the heart, soul, and future of the sport. Research told them that fans were disengaged and that the engineering side had overtaken the human side. Turley told Creative Review that F1 had a logo, but they didn't really have an identity. Initially, Turley had worked to distill the F1 brand through a graphic device that moved away from the letter and the numeral. He thought they couldn't do an F or a 1 any better than Carter and Wong had. But when they landed on the ultimate design, it had presence. The result was this logo, made up of 3 simple shapes forming an F and a 1. The tilt forward evokes speed, and the shapes evoke the bends of a racetrack. It's a flexible design, and was launched with a new suite of typefaces by French designer Marc Raoult. The relaunch was followed in 2019 by the first season of the Netflix documentary series Drive to Survive. The series and rebranding has ushered in a new era for F1, re-energizing its fan base and expanding it significantly by becoming a multi-platform experience. Number 3. Twitter. Although it's basically dead now, Twitter went through several logos before settling on its iconic blue bird. Initially part of the audio and video directory Audio, Twitter's first unofficial logos were boring, weird, featured different spelling, and in one case, a different name. But in 2006, the company launched its first official logo. Designed by Linda Gavin and using a rounded sans serif style, the logo was the name, Twitter. The iconic blue was there with a white outline around the letters, creating a bubble-like effect. The Twitter bird did exist around this time, but it wasn't an official part of the logo because it was actually bought from iStock. Designed by Simon Oxley, Larry Bird, as it was known, named after the basketball player, was only featured as an icon on the website. But based on that bird, Twitter updated its logo in 2010 to feature a slightly more streamlined wordmark and a new design of the bird. Co-founder Biz Stone designed a bird featuring a white eye and a sharp tail, and Philip Pascuzzo and Douglas Bowman then refined this design and turned it into this. Then in 2012, the company decided that the Twitter bird was recognizable enough to stand on its own. Graphic designer Martin Grasser sketched thousands of birds, whittling them down to just 24 and presenting them to Jack Dorsey, who was CEO at the time. Dorsey intuitively gravitated to this one. You can feel that rounded effect even if you're not actively looking for it. And that makes sense because this version is made up of 15 circles. There are no straight lines here. The bird is also looking upwards, representing hope, freedom, and development, while the layers of circles are meant to represent connecting people and ideas. The logo quickly became beloved in the design and tech communities, and it was used until the brand's death, when Elon Musk turned it into X in 2023. Number 2. Shell. Shell has been around since the early 1900s when two Dutch petroleum companies with shells for their logos merged, inspiring the name. The first iteration of the logo was based on the design of a mussel shell. Then 4 years later, it was changed to more of a fan-shaped scallop shell. In 1930, the logo was redesigned again to remove clutter and make it more minimalistic, increasing the use of white space. In 1948, the iconic yellow and red colours were introduced, along with a word mark saying Shell in all caps. In 1955, they simplified this design, tidying up the strokes and making the word mark red instead of white to be more readable. In 1961, the background was changed to red to make the yellow logo and name stand out even more. Then in 1971, the rectangle background was ditched. The wordmark was removed from the centre and placed beneath the shape in a new font and case, and lines that looked like sunbeams were added, connecting from the border. The font was changed briefly in 1995. Then in 1999, the wordmark was removed altogether. While it's obviously a ubiquitous brand that most people associate with function more than passion, the creativity behind its name and image is admirable. For more than a century, this petroleum company has used very conceptual branding, a creative risk that more companies can afford to take. Number 1. Apple. For a lot of people's lifetimes, Apple has been represented by a symbol with no need for a word mark. After launching with a strange, over-illustrated logo, Apple introduced its iconic rainbow logo, designed by Rob Janoff, in 1977. It accompanied the launch of its first personal computer, the Apple II, in April of that year. Featuring a 2D apple with a bite taken out of it, it's pretty much the exact silhouette we know today. Urban legend has it that it was meant to represent the bite of a poison apple that famous computer scientist Alan Turing took to kill himself. But according to Steve Jobs, that's not true. However, he did tell Walter Isaacson, the author of his biography, that he wished he'd thought of that. Instead, the bite was used to clarify that it was an apple people were looking at, not a cherry. The bite also allowed the A of the accompanying word mark to nest in the symbol. It's so interesting to try and imagine a world where the Apple symbol could be mistaken for anything else. It's also amusing to see such a minimalist, streamlined logo by today's standards next to such a loud font. The Apple of today would never. And from 1984 on, it never has. That year, the wordmark was removed, and the colours and shape of the logo were tweaked slightly. This version of the logo was used until 1998. In that time, Steve Jobs left, returned, and started repositioning Apple as a luxury brand. During that period, the rainbow logo was stripped in favour of solid black, and the shape was also slimmed down slightly. And while it's undergone different treatments over the years, it remains more or less the same up to today. While it seems preordained that consumers naturally understand Apple's logo to be apples, it's good to know that even they had to educate the market on exactly what their symbol was. Much in the same way it took consumers years to identify Nike's abstract mark and Starbucks' illustrated siren with their respective brands and products, it can take just as long when your logo is a literal representation of a thing. And while having a logo that's identifiable without words is great, it doesn't necessarily mean that you have a sound business. And when brands are able to use design creatively and consistently to communicate their true essence, they usually survive.